Uhuru, Comrade Jesse, comrades of the convention. I'd like to really express my appreciation for being able to be here today. It's already been mentioned, but yesterday was just an amazing day for the convention. I think that not only did the USM raise an extraordinary amount of money on yesterday, we intend to match that on today, but it was something that demonstrated this dynamic organization, this dynamic movement, this dynamic representation of African internationalism, of the African People's Socialist Party, working as it's been characterized behind enemy lines. Having taken the struggle for African liberation to another level, having opened up a new front in the struggle for African freedom, having given a materialist definition and to the struggle that we engaged in, having participated in demonstrating the reality that the entire social system that we are talking about rests upon the foundation of the exploitation and the oppression of Africans and other oppressed peoples around the world. This is really important because what we are doing with this convention, and as was demonstrated on yesterday, is helping to really clarify that the struggle of African people and other oppressed peoples around the world is not about some need to satisfy the narcissistic assumptions of white people of your centrality or the significance of white people that's driving us to find acceptance and that what have you. We're saying that, and this convention is helping to unfold the reality that the whole world that we're looking at today, the whole world that's being experienced today, with this COVID-19 pandemic being only one expression of it, is in a state of crisis. It's a world that was constructed on a fault line. And this fault line is the oppression of African people, the slavery and its consequences, and the structures, political, economic, and social structures that were created on this basis of enslaved and colonized people. This is the fundamental fault line, and as people begin to struggle to change this relationship, it shakes the entire foundation. And so what we're seeing is everybody in the whole world is experiencing the consequence of this resistance because, again, the capitalist system itself, the colonial capitalist system itself, rests upon a foundation of the oppression and the exploitation of almost everybody in the world. And I'm saying this is really important because there's a way the world has been perceived by the white ruling class and white people and the oppressors, and oftentimes the oppressed in general, as something that has come about in this situation as a consequence of genius, creativity, if you will, civilization of white people, and the lack of the same from everybody else. That there has been absent from this discussion for the longest period of time the notion that there are material interests at stake here, that beyond the aspiration of slave holders to continue to dominate human beings that they have purchased, there are material interests at stake here. There is a dialectic that connects the enslaved and colonized African and the rest of the world and white people. And this is the basis. This is also the foundation upon which the entire social system rests. I want to just quote something. It was really interesting because this is from New York Times from 2013, March of 2013. There's an opinion piece that was written by an African whose name is Walter Johnson. I quoted him in Vanguard. And in this piece, the title of which is King Cotton's Long Shadow he makes this point, the last two paragraphs. It is not simply that the labor of enslaved people underwrote 19th century capitalism. Enslaved people were the capital. 4 million people worth at least $3 billion in 1860, which was more than all the capital invested in railroads and factories in the United States combined. Seen in this light, the conventional distinction between slavery and capitalism fades into meaninglessness. We are accustomed to reckoning the legacy of slavery in the United States in terms of Black disadvantage. Say this again. We are accustomed to reckoning the legacy of slavery in the United States in terms of Black disadvantage. The centrality of slavery to the nation's economic development, however, suggests that any calculation of the nation's unpaid debt for slavery must include a measure of the wealth it produced, of advantage as well as disadvantage. He's now talking about dialectical relationship. It's not just enough to talk about what we characterize as slavery in terms of the disadvantage that it imposed on Africa and African people, but also it provided advantage. And part of that advantage was mentioned with the $3 billion in 1860 that the 4 million capitals in the United States represented, and which was worth the capital invested in railroads and factories in the United States combined, all of that. So it's not just that we were disadvantaged by this, but that the white people, the imperialism, and this is just specific to the United States that we're talking about now. And then, as you know, we've quoted often the thing that Marx has talked about in terms of wage slavery, as he characterized it, in Europe, required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in what he characterized as the New World. The reality is the whole capitalist system, again, all of its activity rested upon this foundation of what would now be characterized as colonialism, although we characterize it as colonial slavery from the very beginning. It was colonialism then, it's colonialism now. And so when we talk about this attack on the bourgeoisie, this going now to the bourgeoisie to make Wall Street pay, it's with this understanding in mind that we take this approach. But the other thing that helps us with this is if you recognize that the whole capitalist system rests upon a foundation of the colonization, the theft of resources, the pedestal of oppression of the vast majority of the peoples of the world, then it's easy to understand. Although the clever bourgeois economists and Marxists haven't been able to wrap their heads around this fact that everything that we've seen in terms of economic crisis that allowed us to talk about the crisis of imperialism even before COVID-19, since our inception, everything that we see here is related to the struggles of peoples around the world taking back their resources. There is a direct relationship to, as we've always quoted, how the price of gasoline in the United States and in places like Florida and places like London, the price of gasoline goes up every time there is a strike by oil workers in Nigeria. There's a direct relationship to that. As people begin to take back our resources, the entire capitalist system is thrust into a state of crisis. And what this means, among other things, is it affects the policies that you see coming from imperial powers, including the United States, and it affects the psyche of the white people of the world who have become accustomed to this relationship, haven't had to think about a relationship between a Nigerian worker and bringing up the oil and the price of gas in their communities. But now this stuff is being forced upon the agenda and the psyche of the ordinary white people, and certainly of the bourgeoisie, certainly of the rulers, certainly of Wall Street as we characterize it, because we see this gyration of the stock prices and things like that. We see the uncertainty that's been thrust into the economic reality. We even see how this movement toward challenging the last 70-year-old arrangement among the capitalists themselves that's been called the Atlanticist process, how that's being shaken and how it has actually been overthrown. It'll never be the same anymore as a consequence of this crisis. This was before COVID-19. And so we've seen the bourgeoisie expressing all kinds of anxiety, so that in 2018, the so-called business roundtable, you had several scores of businesses. These are the big guys now, at least scores of them, talking about how, putting out a statement about how they had to have a new kind of relationship, that their corporations had to be based on new relationship, not just getting profits, not just satisfying shareholders, but it had to treat workers a certain way. It sounded like Bernie Sanders. It had to create other kinds of things to the benefit of customers as well as stockholders, etc. This is the bourgeoisie trying to protect the self. Sanders is the bourgeoisie trying to protect the self. Elizabeth Warren is the bourgeoisie trying to protect the self. Comrade Jesse Neville mentioned how in this journal, Foreign Affairs, which is a publication, a journal of the bourgeoisie, is printed, and sometimes you can find it in public view in major bookstores, bookshops, news shops, and about who will run the world. And one of the featured persons, writers in this particular journal, which was from January, February 2019, is Elizabeth Warren, who is offering up some of the same kind of advice about how the workers have to be taken care of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're not saying overturn capitalism. The reason they're saying this is how you save capitalism, by doing stuff for the workers, by now making capitalism amenable to the interests of broad masses of people, which is something capitalism cannot do. It can't do it. I mean, it can offer some measly, paltry reforms like Sanders called for, and you will see some of that. Even Biden will come out of this situation offering up something to satisfy people who voted for Sanders. It has no interest in the masses of people, and certainly has no interest in African people. Sanders has no interest in African people. That's why what they're talking about, to resolve the crisis of capitalism, does not include reparations, the issue that we're talking about on today, but we include reparations. And what has to be recognized is something that's seldom considered by us. When I say us now, I'm talking about those forces that consider themselves anti-imperialist, revolutionary forces, communist, socialist, etc. Is the psychology that it revolves also around the economy, the political economy of the world. And so you have a certain sector of the population of the world that's accustomed to having to scrap for everything, accustomed to not having enough food to eat. That's a natural condition. Really, it's a natural condition in Africa and much of the world. People go to bed hungry all the time. There's stuff that people who are participating in this meeting today that you throw away on a regular basis, that people in various places around the world are talking about what you call food, would be pleased to eat. I was looking just yesterday, or perhaps it was this morning, at a study that was being led by Comrade Asa Anpu, who is the Secretary General of the African People's Socialist Party, South Africa. And he's talking about how, and I've seen this myself, in certain, around certain townships, there are mountains of garbage. And people find themselves going through this on a regular basis, this garbage. I've seen it, trying to eke out something that they could somehow make do with to provide for their living. This is the capitalism that we're talking about, that's driving people to places that's intolerable and challenges the rule of white power, of capital. So the fact is that our psyche is affected also by the political economy, that we that we have to live with. And particularly if we do not understand political economy, particularly if we do not have the science at our advantage, and the bourgeoisie doesn't have the science. It knows a lot, but it doesn't have the science because it cannot believe in the inevitability of its destruction and inevitability of its loss. And so it doesn't have the science, but we have the science that shows us the inevitability of our victory, and therefore it shows us also the inevitability of the defeat of capital. But capital, the bourgeoisie, far-seeing thinking representatives of the bourgeoisie are becoming extraordinarily anxious. And so, like I said, in 2018, we saw the statement coming from the Business Roundtable about how they had to do better for workers, and it could have been written by Bernie Sanders. It could have been written by Elizabeth Warren. But this is the bourgeoisie because it sees that if the stuff is not working for it, it's fomenting revolutionary consciousness among masses of people around the world. However, we saw just recently how the Business Roundtable has retreated from that position that it put out. The first time it's ever put out a position that didn't put the stockholders first. This was in 2018. This is when, we're talking about, this is also evidence of the depth of the crisis of imperialism, how the bourgeoisie itself is anxious. And people are writing, the fact is that when you talk about what's happening today, it's not COVID-19 that the bourgeoisie is afraid of, it's us. Us being the oppressed peoples of the world. It's the colonized of the world. That's why they're using powerful weapons to kill Venezuela. They're using these weapons to destroy Iran, to keep it from being anything. They're using these weapons and tools to crush any kind of movement and resistance in Syria. They're using these weapons to police our communities in this country, in Kenya, and other places. We see the state being used not to crush COVID-19, but to crush the people, to keep the people contained, because that's where the fear is. So they are on a very rocky kind of foundation that's being expressed in a lot of different ways. And this is part of what it is we're seeing. Somebody, I think it was Comrade President Kalai on the net, who made the point that the reason they are saying that only X numbers of people can go into a shop in this country at a time is not because of COVID-19, because they know the desperation of the people will drive people into those shops, into those grocery stores, into those supermarkets to take what we need in order to live. And so they are trying to make that difficult to occur. So something is happening here. And the bourgeoisie is on a shaky foundation. But as Lenin said, it's a greedy bourgeoisie. Profit is a basic motivation. It'll drive a bus off a cliff that it knows is there. If there seems to be profit someplace on the horizon, they would drive a bus off the cliff to try to get to it. And this is what we're looking at. And so we see a retreat now by the Business Roundtable from the position that it put out in 2018 in terms of what corporations should be doing and how they should be moving. But we are not retreating. We see their anxiety. And we've also seen evidence of their anxiety other than the Business Roundtable. That was just one glaring kind of example. We've seen other businesses, corporations and what have you, who have also been talking as individual corporations or small groups of corporations, even publishing journals that is supposed to show that this is the good side of capitalism. The good side of capitalism can work, and this is what the good capitalists need to be able to do. There's no such thing as a good capitalist. That's not like this. That's like there's no such thing as a good slave master. There's no such thing as a good capitalist. So the capitalist is rotten. It's based on the exploitation and theft of value that's created by somebody else for people who don't even have to work to get the value. That's how capitalism is. So there's no such thing as a good method of doing that. There's no such thing as a good prison guard. There's no such thing as a good warden who presides over keeping people in prison, etc. So capitalism doesn't provide anything good, but what we see is anxiety. And the anxiety is deepening. And what we see also now with the COVID-19 pandemic is more and more people in motion from all kinds of political persuasions, opportunists, desperate, ordinary, desperate human beings. Everybody's in motion, and this is a terrifying sector for the bourgeoisie. And so, yes, our work up to now has always been based primarily on a drive to make reparations the issue among masses of the people. And from our perspective, in the final analysis, the reparations will be attained through revolutionary conquest, through victory of the oppressed people who will take back our resources and what our resources have produced for the capitalists in places around the world. Part of how that process means that even though we are not opposed to people who move toward courts and different kinds of legislatures to get reparations ball moving, we know that in the final analysis, if a court or the legislature offers up anything that looks like reparations, it's going to be based on what we build on the ground and the masses that we went into accepting this proposition that we have around reparations, which is responsible for the two-pronged approach that we're talking about right now, the USM taking with this reparations demand. One of them is called non-confrontational. And while it has been characterized as without protest, we mean without direct protest, without necessarily direct protest, because the confrontational protest is a protest against the same bourgeoisie. And so they have this example, look at what's happening over here as the basis of them being able and forced to make some kind of concession to the demand for reparations. So that's where we are. And it's a splendid time to do this because the rest of the people around the world have been living in states of anxiety now for hundreds of years. And finally, the bourgeoisie itself is scared, it's nervous, it's anxious, it's cannibalizing itself. It's $2 trillion, and I guarantee that the $2 trillion on the tip of the iceberg is what you can see. You haven't seen the amount of resources that's been shifted to military and intelligence organizations and things like that would also be a part of it, and you haven't seen the amount of resources that they're going to have to put into the bucket in order to keep the economy running. And when I say running, I don't mean necessarily at our benefit, but it might mean more resources going to the people, because when they first talked about the so-called this primer that they're doing to putting the resources in, when they first talked about giving the money, they didn't include the people. It's only because of pushback from the people, how are we going to live, that they included something for the people in this whole process. So what we are saying is that we have to dig in and identify the bourgeoisie. We have to identify the bourgeoisie. We have to target the capitalist system born of slavery and genocide. We have to smear it. We have to tar it so that everybody can see exactly what it is, show its nastiness for the world, because, and this is also important because even as we talking about reparations, there are people like Elizabeth Warren, there are other hustlers out there talking about reparations who would use it to create some kind of poverty program or some facsimile of a poverty program or something to that effect, a new welfare bill. But what we are saying is we need to besmirch it. We need to show what filth rot capitalism represents, what Wall Street is made of. We have to talk about the fact, as has been said, that it rests upon the graves of African people, both literally and figuratively. That's the Wall Street that we have to really expose. And part of this is helping. We have to help to separate as many of the white people in their consciousness from this assumption that somehow it's the genes of white people, et cetera. And we've done all of this, and why something special for black people kind of nonsense that we often hear about. So we want to show everybody the foundation of the system. In the process of doing that, we can expose to everybody how they can overcome the difficulties that they're confronted with through reparations to African people. So that's what it is. And for us, again, I think it's really important for us. We have to call it by its name. We have to say we are fighting against colonial capitalism. We have to say that, because if we allow them to just maintain this stuff about the unfortunate left behinds or the racially disadvantaged garbage, then it's just a matter of them doing something nice. It's just a matter of them opening their charity. It's just a matter of creating another united fund or something to that effect. That ain't what we're talking about at all. We're talking about a social system that is incapable. What has to happen is not pushing them, forcing them to act nice. What has to happen is to push them to the point where the only thing that they can offer is a challenge to the system itself, that this is what they have to identify, and this is what they have to try to protect, and this is how they have to try to satisfy what's coming from us around this demand for reparations. So I know we're on the right path, and I know that's why more and more people are joining USM as individuals, and I know that's why we're building USM organizations throughout every state and every city in this country, and even looking to expand beyond that. And this is just a really magnificent opportunity that we have to drive a stake into the heart of this whole rotten social system. So even the nice capitalists need to understand that that we're coming for them, that we're coming for this social system. Make them prove that the social system is not as bad as we say it is. Make them prove it. Make them have to go and work very hard to show that it's not the system that's messed up. So I want to just thank you, everybody, and I've probably spoken long enough, and I know there are people who have to speak in this panel. Uhuru, comrades.